Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to the Lawrence County Museum. Is this your first time? No, you've all been here before, right? Great. My name is Connie, and I'm the administrator here, and we're so glad to have you here with us today. If you'd like to eat your lunch, there's tables set up, or you can sit as for the lecture. Everybody's visiting.
Right.
I just wanted to tell you about a couple things coming up at the museum. We have tonight, there's a Revolutionary War lecture starting at 7 o'clock with Durant Ashmore on Francis Marion. And then starting next Saturday, we're going to have the District 55 school art show. So we're going to have all 11 schools represented, and we're going to have a great art show. And then, of course, we'd love for you to come shop with us on Black Friday and Small Business Saturday. We're going to have a Merry Market right here in the Magnolia Room with 20-plus vendors, so we'd love for you to come. But you're all here to hear Ann. And you know Ann, and of course you know that she taught school I was like, Ann, where have you taught school? And she started listing all the places, Lawrence and Clinton and Greenwood and Iowa and other places I've forgotten. And she taught school for many years, and she is one of our volunteers here at the museum. We're so glad to have her. And she is a history enthusiast, and we're so happy that she's going to be sharing with you today a report on this book by Barbara Tuchman about the first salute. And do we have your microphone on?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to turn this over to Ann, and she'll be glad to take any questions at the end or as they go along. And enjoy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Connie. I am happy to be here and to share with you some ideas from a book that I have really enjoyed by Barbara Tuchman. As you see here, this is the flag that was first saluted by another nation after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This flag had been created by the Second Continental Congress, and it contained the crosses of St. Andrew and St. George. St. George's cross was vertical, and St. Andrew's cross was on a diagonal, and they are combined in the canon of the British flag. And because we were British colonies, it's in the canon of our flag, along with the 13 red and white stripes that you see here. In the summer of 23, so a year ago, we were studying the book of Daniel in our Sunday school class, and so we ordered the commentary on Book of Daniel by James Montgomery Boyce. As we were reading it, he commented that the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel was written in detail, just like Barbara Tuchman writes history. And I was looking for a good book to read, so I looked to see what she had written, and with the Tester Centennial coming up in 2026, I decided I would get this book and just fell in love with it from the beginning. It is a complete history of the Revolutionary War, and she covers the countries. It is mostly about the navies that supported us in the Revolutionary War, and those countries are the Netherlands and the French and the Spanish to another degree. Of course, we were fighting the English, and their navies come in a lot in the book, and we, of course, had to develop our own continental navy. And she describes the influence that what happens here at the first salute to our flag affects the things that have been going on in Europe for 700 years with monarchs and with royalty and with peerage and with subservient people that are not really free as we hope to always be. Britain's King George was a powerhouse. He was the last king that we served. And this is his coronation picture. At the end of the Revolutionary War, when he hears about the defeat at Yorktown, he tries to resign because he says, I'm not going to be anybody. They talk him out of it, but of course, the kings after the revolution in our country were much less powerful, and it was within 10 years that France had a major revolution, and their king was actually beheaded. And so this is the king that really helped us out tremendously by sending funds and sending his navy to the colonies. He had granted the Huguenots and Lutherans the right to practice their religions, and we'll see a little bit later on that the English admirals were not quite as tolerant as he was. He is the one that met with Ben Franklin and John Laurens, and we'll talk more about John Laurens later, and Thomas Paine. John Laurens is the one in meeting with King Louis that finally said to him, if you don't give us more support at this time, we're probably going to lose this battle, and this sword that is at my side, I will have to use against your people. He was married to Marie Antoinette, and she was executed later. She was actually from Austria and was executed later as a traitor. This is the flag that was the Grand Union flag. It had been adopted in December of 1775, and then it was relinquished when we replaced the cannon with 13 stars in a circle. This flag was made by Margaret Manny, and it was first raised on one of the first 5 ships that we had, the Alfred, and it was John Paul Jones that remembers the raising of that ship, of that flag on the ship. Washington displayed this flag at Prospect Hill, and the flag would have been seen a number of times before the actual first salute later in 1776. And the fact that it would have been seen a number of places comes into question when the trial comes up for de Graaf, who is the man that ordered the salute, goes on trial for actually doing it. But this is the flag that was saluted, and it had been used by our Navy for a little over a year before the Grand Union flag was replaced. The cannon salute took place on a little island in the West Indies known as Eustatius, and the cannon saluted our little ship with 11 cannon salutes. When the ship went into the harbor, it dipped its flag, which was traditional in those days, and the fort dipped its flag in return. And seeing that they were acknowledged, then the ship that we had sent, Andrea Doria, sent off a 13 cannon salute that was then acknowledged only by 11 cannons, which was a little less than a national salute, but still it was saluted. But this was a really big event when the cannons saluted this flag for the colonies, with St. Kitts being right there next door and owned by the British, and they knew it. And they had ships sitting there in the roadstead in Eustatius also. So it was something that was really talked about. It did not make England very happy. England was actually an ally with the Netherlands. The Netherlands owned Eustatius, and they actually had a 100-year agreement with the number of soldiers that were protecting the Netherlands. The Netherlands had fought an 80-year war for their independence, and at that time, their independence from King Philip of Spain. Then England protected them with the Scottish, a Scottish battery, and they sent something like 6,000 soldiers to the Netherlands. And the idea was that they would protect the Netherlands from King Philip of Spain, or from Spain, as long as the Netherlands would support England as well, and they did, and the agreement was, just so we support one another if you are attacked by another nation. So the fact that the Netherlands shoots off a salute to the colonies, technically England was not being attacked by another country. England was the one doing the attacking on the colonies, so the Netherlands then declared neutrality in the war with the colonies. The citizens of Fort Orange and Eustatius were the ones that made the salute, and when the cannons had gone out on the little ship, the Andrew Doria, the commander of Eustatius didn't know what to do. So he called for the governor to come, and he said, yes, answer it. And so he did. Well, he was home free because he was not the one that insisted on it being answered when the trial came up a whole year later in the Netherlands. The Netherlands had someone in charge of their country at that time. They were free. They didn't have a king. They didn't have a president. It was someone called a stadtholder. And he didn't want to mess up this agreement with England, but then he was over there in the Netherlands where these people were all down at Eustatius in the West Indies. And of course, the cannon salute was the first recognition of the U.S. after the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th of 1776. The West Indies are a big chain from the tip of Florida all the way down to Venezuela. It's a big curved chain, and some of those islands are known as Leeward Islands, and some are known as Windward Islands. The wind blows from the Windward Islands toward the Leeward Islands and fills the sails. And of course, other big islands that you know of are Cuba and Jamaica and Haiti and Santo Domingo are part of all of that chain that connects. Here is a picture of part of the West Indies islands. The main thing that the countries of England and France really liked was the sugar production in this area. And they did not want to lose their islands, and they did change hands a lot during this period of time. One country would take over the other. But you can see here which countries did own. England owned Jamaica, which is further over to the west under Cuba, and they owned St. Kitts, which is here. And right above St. Kitts, you can see, it's very small writing, you may not be able to see it, is St. Eustatius, or Statia. And of course, that was owned by the Netherlands. and Antigua and Guadalupe, no, Antigua and which other one? Barbados down here. And later on we'll talk about Barbados is the one that the Admiral Rodney of England really feels he has to protect, because by the time he's really having to protect it, the French have taken over Tobago. So there go their sugar islands, which they really want to hang on to. Which is more important to England, the sugar islands of the West Indies or the colonies? And so some of the people back home in England really would have said that it's more important to protect the sugar islands. The Netherlands owned the Virgin Islands, which are up in this area, and they also owned Eustatius. Spain owned Cuba and Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. This is Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Cuba's more over to the left. We said that Holland had declared neutrality in the struggle for the colonies, and so at that time there were pirates, and one ship could overtake another ship and take everything on it, and the people own it. One of the English admirals, when he finally arrives in the West Indies, his commanding officer won't let him go down and connect and capture down here in the Spanish Main, which is on South America, where we have the Guyanas. There was part of that was French Guyana, Dutch Guyana, and English Guyana. And the Dutch Guyana today is Suriname. And they're all down here in South America. Okay. One thing that affected the travel at this time, and still affects the travel, and you've probably seen in the news recently that we're concerned about the currents that are changing and that are going to make our ocean much saltier if that Gulf Stream collapses. But in traveling at the time by sail, and depending on the wind, it was just a 3-week trip or so to get from the colonies over to England here. It was basically a 3-week trip if you wanted to travel down to the West Indies from the colonies. And the fact that returning from England to the colonies, however, if you choose to go this route, you're going against the Gulf Stream, might take 3 months. And so what do? They didn't really all know about the currents at that time, but one of the things Ben Franklin did in traveling from the colonies over to France was he would check the strength of that by lowering things into the water. He very much knew about it, and it had been published. So the only way to get over this long trip between Europe and the colonies was either to go further south or in some way to cross the current and get above it. Travel time made a difference as they planned trips from one to the other. Okay. We did not have a navy. So in October of 1775, this is after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the Continental Congress actually bought 4 ships originally and added a 5th very soon. Ships had been being used. Washington had actually commandeered some ships to be used, and he actually had his own flag, which had a snake on it that says, "Don't tread on me." But the Congress actually allowed $500,000 then to be spent to arm 4 more ships, and 13 frigates. I'm sure when the Navy looks at what the cost of shipbuilding, it's like those are unreal figures. But the ships were purchased in November, and Alfred was, the ship Alfred was the largest, and that was the one that the flag had been raised on back in 1775. And then there was the Andrew Doria, which is the ship that actually had arrived in, by itself. It was on a single journey. It was sent out to sea after the Declaration of Independence was signed with orders that were sealed. They did not know what they were to do until they were already on the ocean. And so they had 2 jobs. One was to deliver the Declaration of Independence to Eustatius, and the other was to get gunpowder and materials that were needed for the war. And so we have the Alfred, the Andrea Doria, the Cabot, and the Columbus, and then a 5th ship was added later on, the Providence. After the ships were purchased, then they went on several adventures before what happened in November of 1776. Breaking the ice in the Delaware River, the Alfred and the Cabot, several of the ships, were sent to Nassau in the Bahamas, and the purpose of that was to get supplies for the Revolution. And at that time, John Hopkins was the Commodore of the Cabot, and they did capture 88 cannon, 15 mortars, and 24 barrels of gunpowder. On the return ship back to the colonies, they ran into 2 British marauders that had been raiding along the coast, and the British were already doing really ugly things to the colonists while they were fighting against the colonies. On April the 6th, though, after that trip, the Andrea Doria was spotted the Glasgow at 1 a.m., and there was a 3-hour battle overnight, and the Glasgow was greatly damaged, so it fled to Newport, and the Doria, also needing repair, along with the Alfred, they were there together, they returned to Gloucester in New Jersey, and that's where the Andrew Doria will end up leaving from a little bit later on. And that was considered the first successful battle of the Continental Navy. Okay, the Andrew Doria. This was just the little ship that was by itself leaving on October the 23rd of 1776 by itself, and it has a new commander, Isaiah Robinson, and it's to take on military supplies and deliver a copy of the Declaration of Independence to the governor of Eustatius. Now, why was Eustatius so important? Because it was a free merchant trade post. No one paid taxes. They were not greatly secured by gunpowder. It was every nation knew they could come and go in freedom to Eustatius, and it was important because they could bring their goods, sell them there, know that they were safe, and they could even store them there for later trade. But other places around, and especially England, was very good at taxing people and having charges that none of this at Eustatius. There was no charge for anything. They dealt one-on-one with each other, and all countries came. So 3 weeks after leaving in October, they reach Eustatius, and as we said, in the roadstead, they dipped their flag, it was returned, and then fired a 13-gun salute that was answered by an 11-gun salute. Some of you may also remember another ship. When I first read the book, I knew that there was another ship almost by that name, and it's not Andrew Doria, it was the Andrea Doria. In 1956, in the summer, I can remember watching as the Ile-de-France of France brought in the survivors of the Andrea Doria that sank off of Nantucket, and it was hit. It collided with the Stockholm from Sweden, and so some of the passengers were brought in on the Ile-de-France, and that ship, the Andrea Doria, that sank in 1956 is still there off the coast of Nantucket, and it is a favorite diving site today. Okay, here's a picture of what Eustatius looks like with the Fort Orange here. Over on the lower part of the island is Gallows Bay, and it has a sloping beach that is perfect over there for careening. And what is careening? Careening is when you take a ship with all its barnacles that collect over a period of time, and you have to lay it over on its side and scrape the barnacles off. Then you have to turn it to the other side and scrape the barnacles off, which is a time that that ship is really out of commission. There is a solution to it, and later on, Rodney, one of the admirals for England, finally convinces England you have to cover it with copper on the bottom. Covering copper prevents the buildup of the barnacles on the bottom of the ship. So this was a special place of trade. It was a big harbor, and navies and ships from all around the world came there, and the purpose was trade. And when we think about the Netherlands, that's what the Netherlands were into. They were not into fighting a lot of wars. What they did was trade. They made their money that way. They brought in raw materials into that country and did things with them and sold them and traded. They were big merchant men. This is Johannes de Graaf, who was appointed governor of Eustatius just shortly before the November 16th salute. He had been appointed September 5th, and it was really his appointment over a gentleman that came before him because he had been too friendly with the colonies. The other guy had. But all of the people in Eustatius were happy for the trade. There were plenty of people from Great Britain that also traded with the colonies. And so he was a very rich merchant. When he was appointed, some of the ladies objected to that because they said his wife uses tablecloths from Ordsbrook, which was evidently not the grandest kind of tablecloth, and she serves food that's 3 days old. Whether she did or not, they were jealous or didn't like his wife. At some time later, when the U.S. They do have two other ships that they actually name, the de Graaf and the Lady de Graaf, after Johannes de Graaf and his wife. And he is the one that will actually surrender the island of St. Eustatius to the British later on in 1780, but that's 4 years down the road. As we said, the islands of the West Indies change hands a lot. And even in the time, the period of the Revolution, Eustatius is owned by the Netherlands. England takes it over. Later on, France takes it back from England, and then they give it back to the Netherlands. So the Netherlands owns it today. Okay, in December of 1776, our Continental Army was scattered along the Delaware River, and one of the things we know is that Washington crossed the Delaware at Christmas that year, and what did he do? He captured Hessian soldiers. The British had used a lot of money when they fought the French in the 7-Year War or the French and Indian War prior to the Revolution. And part of the reason for the taxes that they were putting on the colonies was to help repay that debt where they had hired people and had spent money fighting the French. And of course, the tactics they used were not acceptable to the colonies who wanted to tax themselves and be represented. But Washington did cross on Christmas night. There was ice floating in the rivers, so there we had some little boats that he had commandeered for part of his men to get across. And even with a violent storm at their back and going in on 2 different roads, they were actually able to be successful, and they had all the Hessian soldiers were prisoners. It makes you wonder, how did they take care of all these prisoners when they were having trouble caring for themselves? At this time, it's good to see some of the and try to get an idea of how they're connected. Tobago will come in a little bit later when we get toward the Battle of Yorktown. Tobago and Barbados, we know already about St. Kitts next to Eustatius. One of the admirals will be at Haiti here. He'll send people to Havana, and before he can leave, then he will wander up through the Bermuda Triangle to get to the Battle of Yorktown. That's not the neatest, most convenient route to get there. Okay, the American colonies had fought several battles up to this time. One, they ran the British ships out of Boston, and then there was the defeat at the Battle of Long Island, which in New York, when Washington was there, but he made it out overnight only by the miracle of a huge fog that set in, and the ships couldn't pursue him, and little boats allowed him to get away and be safe further north to Phillipsburg, New York, where he kept his people. He always wanted to take New York back. That was his thing. Even to the time of the Battle of Yorktown, he was wanting to go get New York. Other decisions were made, and even after Yorktown, he would like to have gone to New York and taken it back too, but it was a matter of the French couldn't keep hanging around. They had been told, this is enough. What we're sending in 1781, this is all we can do, because actually the French were becoming bankrupt as well. So we know that Washington has had to move out of New York and moves further north. He is able to keep in contact with the South and the other colonies. Why? Because they always maintain possession of Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The English do have their main presence in New York. They can only connect with other places that they feel are important. Number one, Charleston. But the only way they can get there, or even to the Yorktown area, is by sea. at the time that Washington crosses the Delaware and defeats the Hessian soldiers there, the Continental Congress leaves Philadelphia because they know or feel that the English are going to attack. It is actually the next year before William Howe comes in and occupies Philadelphia in September of 1777. But where should he have been, or where did General Burgoyne think he should have been? He thinks he should have been with him in order to fight the Battle of Saratoga, and there was just mass miscommunication between the people back in England that wanted Howe in Pennsylvania, when Burgoyne was definitely expecting him to join him at Saratoga, and he didn't. And of course, that defeat made a lot of difference in the Revolutionary War, because it was after that that the French saw that the colonies had a chance to win the war and that they would support the colonists. All along, the Dutch continued to support the colonies with armaments and gunpowder. The English had made sure that the colonists didn't have these things, and there was something that was needed for the gunpowder. It must have been something called saltpeter. We did not have any of that, so those things had to be brought in, and the English had made sure we didn't have the ability to make them, but the Dutch were a real help and in trading and for what we had, because America has always been blessed with a lot of things. Timbers for the ships, and we had indigo and other things that were tradable to the other countries of the world. After the British defeat at Saratoga, the British combined their forces. They moved from where Howe had captured Philadelphia, and they had a presence out on Rhode Island, so they combined everything in New York. And that allows then, in 1780, the French to come in and settle on Rhode Island, and they bring in 1780, they bring in a large Navy group, and they bring in an Army group under a commander named Rochambeau. And what do they do for the first year? Because there's no help, Washington really doesn't have a super big army, well supplied, so the French are really stranded out there at Rhode Island for the year from 1780 when they arrive until 1781, when we finally hear that the French are going to be able to send some Navy and a bigger battleship presence. Okay. Okay, now we can talk about the Netherlands a little bit. In the book, it's really interesting to see that the Netherlands originally had been established by people that were chased across Europe, and if there was good land, they were chased further. They kept being chased further and further until there was only this swampland area, and that was where they ended up, and they made the best of it. They made ships with a shallow draft. They simplified the rigging, and their ships, the little ships that they made, could be sailed with 10 people, where other merchant ships took 30. So they were just very smart about everything they did. They didn't have to have guns on their ships for merchant purposes, so they can be much lighter. And their sailors handled ropes from a very early age. The admirals of England especially, and some of France, were from the peer group. And they were educated, but they didn't handle the ropes and sail the ships as early. The people of the Netherlands were right there with their ships. They were always on them, sailing them. so very smart about sailing. And they had made their land habitable by using hydraulic engineering. They had mountains that were high, they had dikes, there were ramps, there were polders, there were canals, and there were windmills. And then they had to keep all of them in good repair, so the people were very industrious. And they did fight an 80-year fight for independence from Spain. Now, in fighting initially to be free of King Philip and the Spanish, in 1568, you'll remember that shortly after that, King Philip decides he's going to defeat the British and these people from the Netherlands once and for all. And so he sends an armada to capture and to conquer the English Channel. And we know 1588, that's the defeat of the Spanish Armada. So they actually, the Spanish are out of the picture as far as being sailors a lot after that time. Their battle was for 60 years, and we think it was a long time for our revolution, starting from 75 all the way to 81. Okay, this is the map of the Netherlands, and you see all the rivers that are running through it. Now, when they decide to become a country, that is another thing, they had cities that were all very different, just like our colonies were all very different in what they had been, our colonies had been occupied by people from different countries with different ideas. But in the Netherlands, each city was very cliquish to its own people. And so they wanted to fight and be free of Spain, but combining them into one country was something else. And they had a north and a south, and it wasn't like our north and south. What separated them was religion. The northern part was definitely Protestant and followed Calvin, and the southern part was Catholic. And there were two situations that brought this, especially the northern provinces, together. There were 7 of them. One was in Leyden, up here, and it was protected by dikes. And the Spanish had a siege against it for many months, and the people were starving to death. And they couldn't break in and get there to give them food. And finally, a man named William of Orange took hold and led them, and he decided that what they needed to do was break the dikes so that the Spanish ships would have to get out and the people would have to leave, or the Spanish people would have to leave. But to do that, in breaking the dikes, you ruined all the cultured land around. So he had to go around and get permission of everybody that would be flooded. Finally, they did break the dikes, and they were able to get in with their little shallow boats, and the wind blew them toward Leyden for a while, but then the wind changed, and they had a hard time. They had to actually take the boats, portage them over mud flats. Then the wind changed again and blew them on in, and so they were able to save Leyden. And along with saving Leyden then, which is, wait a minute, where is right here, William of Orange offered them, because he was the head over the collection of monies that they had then, I guess it was like taxes, and so he gave them 2 opportunities. I'll either reduce your taxes for a period of time, or I'll give you a university. Which do you want? And which did they take? They took the university. And today, because taxes, you know, they come and go, they can be added later, they can be deducted, but they took the university, And today, that school is very well known for its research, and some of the latest things, if any of you are connected to Duke University, some of their research is connected to that school in Holland. But they kept the university, and they still have it. We talked about a little bit about the Scottish battalion that was helping to protect the Netherlands at that time. And yet it became a point of discussion during the Revolutionary War when the Netherlands would not send it back to England so they could release other people to fight in the colonies. Then another battle takes place later on because of the Battle of Leyden. There's another battle, and this time it's at Antwerp. And the reason that battle was really bad was they burned everything, killed everybody. The Spanish came in and did that. And it wasn't really necessarily what the King Philip intended for them to do, but what he had not done, he had not paid his soldiers and his the members of his navy. He hadn't paid them, and he had been given permission not to pay anybody because he needed to balance the budget. So how do you balance the budget? You just don't pay any of the things that you're obligated to pay. So the sailors really were angry, and so when they got to Antwerp, they really took advantage of the people there. This is the southern part of the Netherlands, and it did not get its independence in 1648, along with the northern part. It was almost 100 years later before Belgium became a country, and it is Catholic. It's the Catholic part of the Netherlands. They were not quite as persecuted as the northern part because they were Catholic, and Philip wanted everybody to be Catholic. Okay. We talked about Leyden being seized and the water, and Antwerp there. Okay. Now, back on the continental side, we know of these battles. There was the Battle of Ticonderoga, and what's significant about it is because later on we get the cannons from that to help get the British out of Boston. Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen are fighting there. Benedict Arnold was a hero of that, and he's a hero later on at Saratoga as well. They seized other things, Crown Point and St. John's, and we knew that it provided the artillery for Washington. From Henry Knox going in a terrible winter and carrying sleds and everything over ice to get to Boston and run the British out. And then the first battle of the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord. Washington at Boston meets Knox in July before the route of getting Boston free in 76 in March. But when the British left Boston, they went to Nova Scotia for a while, and then they later on go back to New York. And then the New Jersey campaign, and then Washington above, and above New York City. And then later on, as we've said, the British combine all of their efforts from Philadelphia and Rhode Island in to New York. Let's see what's different here. The events of 75 and 76, we do get the Battle of Ticonderoga. The Second Continental Congress creates the Navy. The Navy actually goes out in 76 to the Bahamas, and the British get out of Boston. Then there's a battle in South Carolina at Sullivan's Island. Now, we didn't have a bunch of ships there. They did, but they're fighting was not successful because of our palmetto logs. And so the British Admiral Clinton was sent back to New York there. Then the Declaration of Independence, followed by the Johann de Graaf being sworn in September of '76. The British have control of Manhattan, and Benedict Arnold fights a battle in October of that year on Lake Champlain. It's called the Battle of Valcour Island. He's not really successful. He has commandeered a number of smaller boats on Lake Champlain, and he fights against Burgoyne in the lake. And even though he loses and everybody's captured and his ships are burned, the thing that he did was he slowed the British down. And so fighting that in October, it slows the British down so that they have to regroup before the following year when they attack Saratoga, and it gives us a chance to prepare more for a battle. So that was, even though it was not a win, it was a help, and that was Benedict Arnold that was there that did that. And the British also capture Fort Washington, followed by the first salute, which takes place in the West Indies. The Battle of Saratoga was in September-October of 1777, and the generals there were Gates and Daniel Morgan and Benedict Arnold, and they do defeat Burgoyne. It was a double battle, so the second one is where they managed to get the surrender. Lord Germain, who was in London, had felt that Howe should be operating in Pennsylvania, and we know he actually went up and captured Philadelphia, but would have been more helpful to Burgoyne if he had had more help, and he was expecting it, and there was just a total lack of communication there. Gates gave no recognition to Benedict Arnold. At that time, he had actually fired Benedict Arnold from the battle, but Benedict Arnold didn't take that, and so he moved around on the left flank, captured a redoubt, which was a building to protect the English that they had built, and he captured it, and so really was part of saving the day there. It was because of that battle and the success there that the Treaty of Alliance was made with France. And it was two things. It was the agreement between the colonies and France that we will neither one sign any kind of treaty unless the U.S. has independence and unless the British have moved all of their soldiers out of the colonies. The second treaty was to be agreeable trade between France and the colonies. And England, the Netherlands, France, all were very much interested in trade with the colonies because we had so many wonderful raw materials. Spain later on joins the agreement with France because they have lost two islands in the Mediterranean Sea known as Gibraltar and Minorca, and they particularly want to get Minorca back. Okay. After the Battle of Saratoga, John Paul Jones, who had helped to raise the first continental flag much earlier in '75, he's the one that takes the message to France that there's been surrender. And he takes the ship Ranger and he goes, and while he is waiting for the Bonhomme Richard, which is named for Benjamin Franklin, to be rebuilt and ordered for him to sail, he makes a trip around England on orders, and what does he do? He makes raids on the coastal towns. He sets fire to ships in the harbors. He captures merchantmen, and he seizes a 20-gun ship named the Drake, and he takes it to France and delivers it. And then he gets command of the Bonhomme Richard, and he scouted for a 41-ship British convoy, and it included the Serapis, one of the British big ships with 50 guns. And after a long battle, his ship is mutilated and is ready to sink. And so his quartermaster hollers, "Quarter, quarter," like, "I'm giving up." And John Paul Jones throws his pistol at him, knocks him in the head, knocks him out, and he says to the captain of the Serapis, "I have just begun to fight." And so he continues the fight. His own ship, some of the powder explodes, and it later sinks, but he takes over the Serapis. And where does he take it? He takes it to Holland. And so the ladies of Holland minister to his sailors, and they also minister to those that he's captured from the English ship. This is the flag, then, that we have as of June 14th, 1777, and Washington helped to maintain that it would have a blue field in the canton, and it originally had 13 stars, but 2 more were added after 1795. That was Vermont and Kentucky. And after the French were supporting us in 1778, France did send Navy to New York to help us defeat the English. And when they arrived, it was to combine Washington's forces from upper New York, where they were, with the ships from France. Problem was, you've heard of Sandy Hook, I know, but Sandy Hook is, for another reason, Sandy Hook is almost a barrier to get into the New York harbor, so you have to have the tides be exactly right, and you have to have shallow draft ships. So Estaing was not able to get in to meet up with Washington, which had been the plan. And so that had to be canceled, and then he moves out to the east to Rhode Island to fight with the French who are out there at that, he is the French. He moves out to fight with the English. But that battle has to be averted because of bad weather conditions. Then, this was the first attempt by the French, and later on, what he does when he leaves Rhode Island, then he moves down to try to capture and he moves down to the West Indies, and later on he's injured at a battle trying to capture Savannah, which was unsuccessful. Okay, let's see. Well, looking at time, we have a bunch of admirals of Great Britain. Lord Sandwich is in London. We have Germain, who's an advisor to King George, and we have Clennon, who we're going to hear a good bit about because he is in New York, and he doesn't support Lord Cornwallis in the manner he should have. We are going to look now, and I realize our time is running short, we are going to look at a battle that takes place at the Chesapeake Bay. Graves and Clennon are in New York. Hood is in the West Indies, and there is a battle on September 5th at the Chesapeake Bay that lasts till the 9th, and the English fleet ends up returning, and so they don't support Lord Cornwallis at all. Admiral Rodney has been down in the West Indies. He has fought a battle for England that Gibraltar and Minorca in the Mediterranean had been under siege, and he fights that battle and wins it, and then goes to the West Indies. Okay, let's see if we can get this. Okay, this is a little bit about Rodney, who is over the naval actions in the West Indies. He was probably the only young admiral. They had a bunch of old ones that weren't really willing to stick their necks out to fight battles. But Rodney was the younger one, but he had been imprisoned in Paris. Why was he imprisoned in Paris? Because he had built up so many debts in England that he had been run out of England, and then he was imprisoned in Paris for debts. He suffered from gout from his drinking habits, and he had a stricture of the prostate that gave him a lot of trouble. And so when he is back out of prison, he fights the battle in the Mediterranean Sea and saves Gibraltar and Minorca for the British. And then he heads to the Caribbean. But he then would like to be there to fight the battle that occurs a little bit later with de Grasse, but he ends up having to go home to have surgery. And let's see, so we have in the U.S. the Articles of Confederation being signed. The British send a peace commission to the colonies in March of '78. And of course, this is after the agreement with France that we won't sign any agreement unless there's independence. And so they won't even meet with them unless two things happen. They offer independence for the colonies and that troops will be withdrawn. And because they won't agree to that up front, they don't ever meet. The Peace Commission never meets with the Continental the Congress. And what they try to do is bribe some of the people, including Henry Lawrence, who is, those bribes are published. And it turns out that Cornwallis had been on leave with the army, and he is the one, he does return to the battle along with the Peace Commission. So the Peace Commission is there for a while, and they end up leaving to go home in November of '78. Let's see, we talked about him. Okay, and that. Then, one of the things that the Carlisle Peace Commission said is if you don't do and make peace or meet with us, then we're going to attack you. Well, a lot of that had been being done already up and down the eastern seaboard. They were killing people and pillaging, and Governor Tryon of New York, who was British, had already done that a lot, from Rhode Island over to New York. 1780 was the low point of the revolution. That was when Charleston was captured in May. And then Gates loses the Battle of Camden in August of that year. And then it was in September that Henry Lawrence throws a pouch as his ship is about to be captured by the British. He throws a pouch overboard that was trying to get some agreements with the Netherlands for support, and it is found with very incriminating ideas, and one of the sailors on the English ship finds it, and so he's put into the Tower of London for the rest of the war, the only American ever housed there, and he was later traded for Cornwallis at the end of the war. In that same year, Benedict Arnold then decides to betray the U.S., and he gives up West Point, which is far north on the Hudson River. So it is a low point of the revolution. We've got Rochambeau and Admiral de Barras out at Roa Island. They've been there for a year, and Washington's up there above New York, but we don't have any way of really fighting a battle because we're low on money. We're low on money to pay our troops. This is Henry Lawrence, who I've already mentioned, threw the pouch overboard and was taken to the Tower of London. In 1780, there was a great hurricane. At that time, even when this book is written in 1988, a much worse hurricane than any that we had ever heard of since. But I don't know about this year. Some of the hurricanes probably have matched the one that occurred then, but it totally devastated the Lesser Antilles. Let's see. Okay, we've talked about that. Okay. The British at home were really upset with the way Admiral Rodney treated the people of Eustatius, because he was given permission and came down and captured Eustatius. When he captured Eustatius, he kept the papers of the British merchants that had actually traded with the colonies, and he sent them over to St. Kitts to be taken back to England for trial, and somehow or another all those papers disappeared before they got there. So those merchants were never tried. Pays to know who you know. Okay. And what did Rodney do with all the merchandise that he took when he captured Eustatius? He put it on ships to send it back to England. 34 ships on what was called the Hotham Convoy head toward England. And despite his precautions in trying to take care of it, the French leave and meet the convoy coming from here. They meet the convoy just off their coast, heading up toward the British Channel, and they take 22 of those ships of loot. The Admiral Picquet captured the convoy. Some of them did escape. The British had sent people out to try to meet up with the French that they knew would try to prevent them from getting there. But the English couldn't find the French, and they couldn't find the convoy either. So that convoy was not as successful as it could have been. So then we'll talk just a little bit, with our time expiring, about the Admiral de Grasse, who comes over to the West Indies. He arrives at Martinique, which is owned by the French, and he manages to get in, even though Hood from the English is trying to block it off, and he gets the fort. He manages to injure Hood's ships, so he can't continue to fight, and as he moves up, he leaves on something like August the 4th, to head up to the Battle of the Bay or to head up to the Chesapeake. And so 5 days later, Hood leaves to follow him. Well, Hood's figuring, okay, where are we going to fight this battle? Are we going to fight it at the Chesapeake, or are we going to fight it in New York? Well, knowing that de Barras has left a week earlier, he gets to the Chesapeake and nobody's there. So he assumes, okay, that the battle's at New York, so I need to go on up there. Well, he gets to New York, and no, it's not there. What happens is that de Grasse has taken his time going up through the Bermuda Triangle, and he only arrives there 2 days after Hood would have been there. Well, then Hood and Clinton and Graves get the notice that the battle is going to be at Chesapeake, and they head down. There is a battle called the Battle of the Bay. It takes about 3 days, but the British are outnumbered, and they end up going home. And here is pretty much what's going on at the time of the Battle of Yorktown. Now, Rochambeau, who moves over from Rhode Island, and they have to send the troops over from there by ship, and then they travel 200 miles here. It's a story about how Washington and Rochambeau get their military down to meet with Lafayette and to trap Cornwallis at Yorktown. After the Battle of the Bay, the French have control of it, and then when Cornwallis is trapped, he tries to send lighted barges down the river. Entrapment at the Chesapeake Bay. Cornwallis does have military stationed across on Gloucester Point, but they are trapped in by some American forces from Virginia and Lucerne's Legion. Lucerne's sort of an interesting person because it was his uncle that paid, his French uncle that paid for Rodney to get out of prison in France so he could come back and fight against the Battle of the Bay, then allows Washington and all of his men to get down while the Bay is taking place and sort of wanders down even toward Cape Hatteras. DeBarris, who had been up here in Rhode Island, and after he let the troops go by land, he comes down with armor and food, dried beef. So he's ready to supply the army. He also has shallow boats along with him that manage to go up and bring the rest of the army so they don't have to hike it all the way down, that they can float down the Chesapeake Bay and then win the Battle of Yorktown. And there's the Battle of Yorktown. We could talk more about it. John Laurens, though, is an interesting person. Lawrence County, Georgia is named for him. He was paroled at Charleston. In the Battle of Charleston, he then left and went to France, and he was there with Ben Franklin and helped to convince King Louis to send people and money to us. Then at the Battle of Yorktown, he is there, and he fights with Alexander Hamilton at Redoubt number 10, which was the last one conquered, and he actually was one that set up the surrender negotiations along with a Frenchman. And after that time, he was killed in 1782 before the final peace agreement was signed in 1783. He had married someone named Martha Manning in London, and he left before the child was before they had a child that was born in 76, and never got to see her. She was raised in the U.S. later by his sister because her mother also died by the time she was 8. Interesting to note that Governor Rutledge of South Carolina had wanted us to surrender, and John did not agree, and he was definitely opposed to slavery. And the first ships, what happened to them, the Andrew Doria, and the Columbus were both burned by their own crews. The Cabot and Alfred were captured, and the Providence was destroyed in Maine in 1779. Okay. Let's see, we can... what happens later in the Caribbean, 6 months after Eustatius was the French capture it back from the British, and it was just totally destroyed. A note here is the English never seriously considered that the Americans could win the war, or that French help would be enough, and they didn't act. The English did not act to prevent Cornwallis being trapped. So, what I'd like to conclude with is Washington's statement after the war Washington, let's see, in his last circular to the states, which he issued in June of 1783, said this: "It seemed that America seemed to be peculiarly designated by Providence for the display of human greatness and felicity. Heaven has crowned its other blessings by giving the fairest opportunity for political happiness than any other nation has ever been favored with. And the result must be a nation which would have a ameliorating influence on all of mankind." And so there was a man who asked the question, so what is this man, this American, like? And as we would look at it today, is it the free and equal new man in a new world that is envisaged? Would it be realized only in spots, although conditions for the new man would come nearer to being realized in America than they would ever come in any of the other overturns of society? The new man would not be endowed with liberty, equality, and fraternity in France after the French Revolution and Napoleon take over. He would not be freed from oppression in Russia with the czars. And a new man formed to serve the people instead of himself would not be created by the communist revolution in China in 1949. So revolutions produce other men, not new men. Halfway between truth and endless era, the mold of the species is permanent. That's Earth's burden. Thank you. A little over. And we have another lecture tonight.